This is the TAF Hub, a show brought to you by TAF Africa Global to educate you on real estate matters, to mentor you and inspire you.
After 48 years of working and also traveling all over the world, I am ready to share my experience with you, especially those young ones who follow me for inspiration. Hi viewers, welcome again to the TAF Hub. This is a continuation of our last episode with Mustafa Briggs. So Mustafa, we'll just take it up from where we left. And let's talk about your book again, the title.
The title, yeah.
Yeah, it's so catchy. So it's ingrained in a lot of our hearts. How did the inspiration come to you for such a powerful and courageous title?
Yeah. So with the title Beyond Bilal, it came about as I was giving the presentation, and it was actually inspired by the professor that I mentioned in the previous episode, Professor Usman Khan. He wrote a book called Beyond Timbuktu. So he was speaking about West African Islamic scholarship. And for the majority of people, when they think of West African Islamic scholarship in the West, they think of Timbuktu, but they don't know about Senegal or all the other places. So he said, no, there's a tradition beyond Timbuktu. So when I was called to give my lecture at King's College and Oxford University, I said, I'm going to call it Beyond Bilal, because I was discussing black history in Islam and the black contribution to Islam. Because for the majority of us, when we think about black people in Islam, the story always begins and ends at Bilal. Nobody knows anything, or hardly anybody knows anything other than Bilal. So I said we need to take the discourse beyond Bilal and discuss the prophets in the Quran that were black, the other Sahaba other than Bilal that were black, and the numerous scholars and figures that came after the time of the Prophet ﷺ to the present day that were also black. So it's all beyond Bilal. Not excluding Bilal from the narrative, but including him and then going beyond him.
Okay, but in the book again, in Beyond Bilal, you highlighted that not only is there a rich, vibrant and historical legacy within Islam spearheaded by black Muslims, but that in fact there is a living legacy alive today in the spirit of West Africa. Tell us more about that and what you see present within that community.
So I feel like that's very interesting. And especially for me as a West African that grew up in the West. Because when we come to West Africa, we have so many scholars here. We have people like Alhaji Malik Sy, just speaking about the Senegambia region. Baye Niasse is here. Alhaji Malik Sy is here. Serigne Touba Sheikh Ahmed Bamba is here. For the majority of us, we grow up seeing their pictures, hearing about them, but we don't actually dive into their teachings and know about their contribution to Islam. But these people, when they leave the Senegambia region, or their books or their knowledge leaves, the way that people react and the way that people appreciate it is amazing. And so I wanted to highlight that. So for example, Sheikh Ibrahim Yasir, he grew up here in the Gambia, in a village called Kersamba. From when he was born, his father had problems with the colonial government in Senegal, and so he migrated to the Gambia. And Sheikh Ibrahim Yasir was about 3 months old. He lived in Kersamba and he grew up there till the age of 11. And then they returned to Senegal. So the majority of his Quranic studies, he did them here in the Gambia. Then he continued his education with his father when they returned to Senegal. Everything he learnt in the Senegambia region. There was even a singer that wrote a poem for him. He said, Musta jug kër baayam teraw ci l'islam benn sëriñ mënu fi wax ne dem na daaraam. But when he left his first Hajj, he went to Saudi Arabia in 1937. He was invited by the king to give a speech. He gave a speech in Arabic in front of the king of Saudi Arabia, and that developed into a relationship that made him, in the 60s, the vice president of the Muslim World League, which is the biggest Islamic organization in the world that was headquartered in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
When he went to Egypt, President Gamal Abdel Nasser took him to Al-Azhar University, where I'm currently Al-Azhar Mosque. He was one of the first people who didn't graduate from Al-Azhar that was given the honor of leading Friday prayers in Al-Azhar. In front of all of the Egyptian scholars, the Arab scholars, the doctors who have PhDs in Islamic studies, he gave lectures and he taught people to the point that they gave him the title Sheikh al-Islam, which means...
he got that from Egypt?
From Egypt.
From Al-Azhar?
From the Al-Azhar University. Sheikh Mahmoud Shaltut and the scholars of Azhar.
Wow.
When they spent time with him, they asked him questions, they saw the depth of his knowledge. They gave him the title Sheikh al-Islam, which is only given to scholars who have mastered every single aspect of Islamic studies. All of that he learned here in West Africa. He didn't leave Senegambia before 37, the age of 37, to study anywhere. And even when he studied here, he studied with his father, and his father had studied with his father. Alhaji Malik Sy, he has a poem called Khilaz al-Zahab. They sing it in the gamus and everything. A lot of us had heard, grew up hearing it, memorized it. The reason why he wrote Khilaz al-Zahab was there was a poem called Qurratul Absar, which was the poem that when you want to study everything to do with the life of the Prophet ﷺ, what you need to learn about the life of the Prophet is summarized in that poem. Alhaji Malik Sy was teaching the poem, and it was written by an Arab. He was teaching it to his students, and then he was correcting it as he was teaching it. He said, no, this man said the Prophet ﷺ had a mule called... And he said two names. He said, no, this was the same mule, but he was correcting the poem as he was teaching it. His students said to him, you know more about the life of the Prophet ﷺ than the people who wrote this poem. Why don't you write your own poem? That's when he sat down and he wrote Khilaz al-Zahab. 30 chapters, everything you need to know about the Prophet ﷺ in detail, he detailed it in that poem. And he wrote that here in West Africa. He was a scholar that came from West Africa, studied in West Africa. Sheikh Ahmadu Bamba, same thing. His poetry, his qasaid, when he praised the Prophet ﷺ and the way that he spoke about Islamic studies, there's a poem that he has called Masalikul Jinan, that everything to do with everything you need to know as a Muslim is in that poem. They took it to some scholars in the Arab world. When they read it, they said, some of the words that he's using, we have to go and find dictionaries to find out the meaning of these words, because the Arabic, the level of his Arabic is higher than our level currently. We have all of that scholarship here in West Africa, but it's like we don't know about it or we don't appreciate it. And then when it goes outside, people appreciate it. I've met people, PhD professors, who studied at Yale, who studied at Harvard, who studied at some of the biggest universities in the West. They did their doctorates and their PhDs on West African scholars. I have a friend, he wrote his PhD on Sheikh Ibrahim Yasir from Yale University. I know another one who graduated from Harvard. She did her PhD thesis on Sheikh Omar Foutiyou Tall. All of those people are here within our countries, and we don't appreciate them. But outside, people are studying and trying to find out the history of Islam in West Africa, because the way that it has manifested here, it's never manifested anywhere like that anywhere else. And the level of scholarship that we have here is amazing. We always talk about natural resources. Africa has all these natural resources that foreigners are exploiting. The same thing with our human resources. We have amazing human resources in the form of these scholars that others are exploiting more than us. So I wanted to change that narrative and reacquaint young West Africans with their own legacy. Because for many of us, we think of Islam as a foreign religion. We think of it as an Arab religion. We think of it as a religion that belongs to Saudi Arabia, when really we have just as much a part of it as they do, if not more. Because the level of knowledge for someone that comes from here to go over there and be respected to that level, it shows that God's light and God's blessing is everywhere. There was a time when everybody thought prophethood and knowledge was with the Israelis and the Israelite prophets. If we look at the time of Solomon and King David and all of those, no one would ever think that a prophet would come from Arabia.
Yeah.
But when the Prophet ﷺ appeared, now Islam is head to head with Christianity and Judaism in the world. So we can see then that God's blessings move around. They're not limited to one nation or one people, but God can choose to appear in any nation and in any people.
Yeah.
And as they always say, the last person the last place where it manifests sometimes is always the best place.
Yes.
Africa might be last in terms of where we've seen it travel to, but it's come here now, and there's something amazing here that people are rushing to discover.
MashaAllah. But let's going back to your youth in your early moments as a Muslim. What examples of black excellence were put forward to you, and what was that led to you diving deep in to find out more?
I would say the closest example for me was Sheikh Hassan Cisse, because I came to Islam through him. And he was a Quranic scholar. He came from a religious family. Ibrahim Yasir was his grandfather on his mother's side. His father, Seling Ali Cisse, also came from a family that was known for scholarship. He went to Dara like everybody else. He memorized Quran in hard conditions, like all the other children from the Dara. When he was a teenager, his grandfather, Sheikh Ibrahim Yasir, sent him to Egypt to study Islamic studies there. He said, anything you need to know, I can teach you here. He said, but the world that we live in now is a world where wherever you go, they'll ask you, where did you study and what's your degree?
Yes.
He said, I want you to go and get a degree. It's not for the knowledge, because I can teach you the knowledge, but for you to have the certificate so that no one can deny you when you travel. So he went to Egypt. He got his degree in Arabic literature from Ain Shams University in Cairo. And then he was offered a job, and this is where the story gets interesting. His uncle, Sheikh Makki Niasse, was the one that told me the story. He wrote a letter to Sheikh Ibrahim Yasir, and he said, I've been offered a job with an amazing salary. I want to start working. He gave the letter to Sheikh Makki Niasse. Sheikh Makki Niasse took it to his grandfather, Ibrahim Yasir. When Ibrahim Yasir read the letter, he said to Sheikh Makki, tell Hassan, this is a good thing, and if he wants to do it, he's free to do it. He said, but if he wants to do what I want him to do, he should go to England and study English. Sheikh Hassan thought about it and he said, but I don't have a scholarship. It's difficult for me to go there, and who's going to fund it? And he said, don't worry, God is our scholarship. Just go and study and everything will be okay. With his Islamic background, with his traditional studies, Ibrahim Yasir wanted him to have other skills, expand, learn new languages, see new things, open things to a new dimension. So he traveled to England, he studied English. He did a master's degree at the University of London. And then Sheikh Ibrahim Yasir met him there, and that's where Sheikh Ibrahim Yasir passed away, 1975. After that, he continued his studies and he went to America to start a PhD in Northwestern University. In the middle of his PhD program, his father, who was the Imam after Ibrahim Yasir, passed away in 1982, so we had to return and become the Imam. Imagine he's a West African scholar, Imam. But he didn't just sit down and say, we're only focusing on Islamic studies, we're only focusing on Wache Kamili and all of that. He brought a clinic and opened a clinic in Medina Bay for medical care, to provide medical services. He opened a radio station and wanted to train the youth so they could have new skills to work, expand their horizons. He opened his own school. He called it the African American Islamic Institute, because he had a lot of students, he had a lot of Talibés in America that would send their children to Senegal to study the Quran with him. So he opened this school for them and for the locals, and they incorporated in the school not just traditional Islamic studies, but learning trades, learning skills, expanding the horizons of the children. He was a scholar that was respected by the UN. When they wanted to eradicate polio in Nigeria, and they were having a tough time with the traditional Islamic leaders who were telling people not to go and get the polio vaccination from the West. Sheikh Hassan was the one they sent, because Ibrahim Yasir has a lot of followers in America, in Nigeria, so that he could speak to them to encourage them to get vaccinated. He was somebody that the UN, anytime they wanted to do something in Africa, they would consult him about it. In America, he was also well respected. So you can see that he used his Islam and his Islamic scholarship to do things beyond what we would traditionally associate with Islam. Really, if we look at Islam and we study it properly, societal development is all a part of Islam. It's not just about praying and doing the rituals, but it's about contributing to your society, contributing to education, opening businesses, being an entrepreneur, having a skill set, being a benefit to your community. All of that is part of the teachings of Islam. If we look at the Prophet ﷺ, he was a trader, he was a businessman, as well as being a prophet. His companions, amongst them, there were those who ran businesses, there were those who ran organizations, there were those who traded, there were those who, everyone, even though they were scholars, they also had a skill set that made them valuable assets to their community. And I saw that Sheikh Hassan Sise was somebody who continued that mission. And he was the closest example for me as a black Muslim that I can also do something similar, or we can try. So I think that aspect of preaching Islam and manifesting Islam, not just limiting Islam to the mosque and the prayer rug, but traveling, being a benefit to your community, expanding your skill set, contributing to your society, all of that is a part of the teachings of Islam. And he never compromised his Islamic faith or his Islamic practice to also be involved in the world. If we speak about the West, there's no organization that's more Western than the UN. But for you as an Islamic scholar to enter the UN as an Imam, work with them, work towards development, work towards the improvement of the human condition, all of that is a part of the teachings of Islam.
MashaAllah.
Sheikh Ibrahim Yasir used to say something, he said, the world is like a house, he said, and everybody has a room in the house. He said, if you think about Muslims as one room, Christians as one room, Westerners as one room, he said, whatever we do in our rooms concerns us. He said, but then there's also things that concern the house in general. So everyone has to come out of their room, meet in the living room, discuss the condition of the house, how to maintain the house. Then when you finish that, you can go back into your room.
That's true.
That's why he was able to work with Kwame Nkrumah, who wasn't Muslim, towards Pan-Africanism and development in West Africa. He connected Kwame Nkrumah. It's interesting, the story of him and Kwame Nkrumah. We all know how major Kwame Nkrumah was to the development of West Africa. Kwame Nkrumah, when he was arrested during the colonial period, he had an uncle who was Muslim, who was a Taliban of Sheikh Ibrahim Yas. So when Sheikh Ibrahim Yas came to Ghana, he told him about his nephew. He said, I want you to pray for him. Ibrahim Yas said, arrange for me to meet him in the prison. Ibrahim Yas visited him in prison, prayed for him, and he asked him, what do you want? He said, I want to become the president of this country, and I want this country to be the first independent country in West Africa to be free from colonization. Sheikh Ibrahim Yas said, okay, you're Christian, how will you work with the Muslims when you become president? He said, we're all Ghanaians, we're all going to work peacefully together. Ibrahim Yas said, okay, I'm going to pray for you, and I guarantee that what you want is going to happen. That's why when he came out of prison, Ibrahim Yas was one of his closest consultants. They have many pictures. His son, Gamal Nkrumah, lives in Egypt. He wrote a lot about his relationship with Ibrahim Yas. During that, not only did he support him with prayers, but he gathered all of the Muslims in Ghana. He made himself a member of the Muslim Association of Ghana, even though he wasn't Ghanaian. And he encouraged all of them to vote for Kwame Nkrumah. Supported him in everything that he was doing, worked with him. He said, because I'm Muslim, he's Christian, but we're all Africans, and we have to work towards the development of Africa. We know that as a Pan-African, his slogan was Africa for the Africans. Sheikh Ibrahim wrote a book in Arabic called Ifriqiya lil Ifriqiyin. Africa is for the Africans. To support that. And he's an Islamic scholar, but these are the kind of Islamic scholars that we have.
That's good.
Yeah.
But let me also stay on and probably share my own bit with Sheikh Hassan Sise, Imam Hassan Sise. We were pretty close, I can say, and at times when he came to Gambia, he stayed at my house next to. I had some apartments there, so I know Sheikh Jerry and all the crew with him. His half brothers. And Imam Hassan, through my wife, my wife who is Nyasen, I had a relationship, and I can tell you that his house, his compound, is the first place I've ever spent a night, in the Islamic world, or in Senegal, where scholars are, meaning the house of scholars. First place I spent the night was at his place. And he was very modern, because obviously he was educated in the West, and also being a grandson of Sheikh Ibrahim Yas, very knowledgeable. But the spread of the religion amongst a certain age group here, and mainly towards the sect, well, Tijaniya and also Nyasen, was because of his aggressiveness. Because he used to host conferences here, huge conferences at McCarthy Square, in connection together with UNFPA. Now I don't think it's happening, and it was held during Christmas. And the reason why he did it was rather than get the Muslim youth going and doing otherwise, they will now be turned into going and doing something that is Islamic. And this thing grew so big. And that is why today, if you notice around the Banjul peri-urban area, quite a number of young people are now connected to the Nyasen. Not the Tariqa is Tijaniya.
Yeah.
But the Nyasen family and Medina Bay and Kaulak, he is the foundation of that.
Definitely.
You know, not only that, I met him outside of the country. I remember once I was in Paris, and just walking down from my hotel, and he was there with his followers, and he called me, Mustafa, I just came from Cameroon. I've just converted 200 people there into Islam. So I think he continued the works of his grandfather.
Definitely.
You know, at that group. And somebody who was very modern. Talking about high sense of humor, if you know him, he had an extremely high sense of humor. And he's one of those leaders that even if you share food with him, he was known for that. We will all eat from one big bowl. And I will remember, very well, and this thing still stays with me. He will always have his breakfast with mbahal. Mbahal Subatel. You know, he will have others there, but mbahal is always there, just to remember him. He had quite a lot of followers here. And finally on him, I was confused when I took the wird. Because my father was connected more to Tiwawan. And as you know, you are asked that your muhaddam or your sering should give you your wird. So traditionally, I should have taken my wird from Tiwawan. But because I was so close to Imam Hassan Sise, and I wanted to take the wird from him, so I was in a dilemma. But anyway, fast forward. I mean, my wird was given to me by Imam Charnoka. So he gave me the wird. But just to tell you the role that late Imam Hassan played in the religion and the sect, the Tariqa Tijaniya, he was very modern, and he's got a lot of people that he draw into this. So I thought I'll also mention my bit, to remember him. But let's speaking of courage, we find your book rife with stories of courage, stories of immense heart. When you go through this book, whose story is it that touches your heart the most?
That's a difficult question. I would say there are a lot of stories that touch my heart in the book, but one story that I'll mention because of the context that we're in being in the Gambia, and speaking of Gambia and contributions to history, in chapter 4, I mention a man by the name of Mohammed Sise, who was a Gambian. He came from Nyani, Upper River. And he was captured in the slave trade and taken to the Caribbean. And he was forced to work there as a slave for many years. But he never gave up hope. Towards the end of the slave trade, he managed to work and save money and hustle until he was able to be freed. And then he was able to return to Gambia. And there were many others like him that were able to do so. Not just them, but people who were from the Senegambia region, who went over to the Americas, and in the harsh condition that they found themselves in terms of being enslaved by the Americans, they managed to preserve their history, preserve their culture, preserve their identity, try and pass it on, and then they ended up contributing to the foundation of American society. So there was one that I mentioned in the previous episode, Muhammad Yaro. He was enslaved, and as he was enslaved, he started to learn skills, brickmaking and different things. So his master, the person who owned him, would hire him out to people so that he could brick make for them. He became so skilled at that that the master started to, anytime he would get paid, he would take a portion of it and save a portion of the money for Muhammad Yaro. Muhammad Yaro then, when his master passed away, after many years of being enslaved, the wife gave him the money that had been saved for him. He was fortunate. And so with that money, he was able to buy himself free from slavery and buy his son free. And this was a time slavery wasn't abolished. So he was a free black man living at a time when slavery was still active in America. He continued to brick make as a free man, and he became the best brickmaker in his area in Washington, to the point that he would get paid double what any white man would be paid. He established himself as an entrepreneur. Then when he had the money, he started to now invest and lend money to people so they could trade. So white people would come to him to take loans to start their businesses and then pay him back. He became so wealthy and so successful that the first Bank of Washington in America in the 1800s, he was one of the shareholders as a free black man. He owned his own property, and he died and was buried in his property. But on his last years, he had white friends even that would come and visit him. One of them wrote, he said, every morning he'd wake up before sunrise and praise Allah and the Prophet. Meaning he was practicing Islam the entire time. He didn't let the harsh conditions of slavery force him to forget his religion, force him to forget his origins. And then until he became a free man and was buried in his own property at a time when that was extremely difficult for African Americans, he was one of the first African American entrepreneurs in the Americas. And so for me, that gave me a source of courage, because the conditions that he faced and the way that society was built and structured against him didn't stop him from achieving his goals. So if he could do it, us at a time where we have knowledge, we have resources, we have freedom, what's to stop us from doing something to that level or even more? We always complain about harsh conditions, we always complain about the country, the government, or anything that we can say that would be a limit to our progress. But I feel that if you believe in yourself and you work hard, nothing can stop you, and you have the blessing, nothing can stop you. My family, when they came to this country, my grandmother, she was named after her maternal grandmother, who was called Mary Ann Benjamin. She married someone called Gabidon. She became known as Mami Gabidon. There was a book written by Hassan Cisse where he speaks about prominent Gambians, and he mentions her in the book. Because she was a very prominent trader in Banjul in the early 1900s. She came to the country and she was selling cake in the Banjul market. That's how she started. We all see women that sell cake. We know the kind of economic status that they had. She continued to expand her business till she became so successful. She sent her youngest son to England to study medicine. He became the first native Gambian doctor and the head of the Gambian church, the Gambian Key Hospital, Jones, Dr. Jones. Dr. Jones, that's my grandmother's uncle.
Mashallah, mashallah.
The condition that she started in, and as a woman, as a widower, her husband had passed away, she was selling cake. She ended up becoming a major property owner in Banjul. She owned a house in Dobson Street. She had 5 children and she owned 6 houses. She gave each of her children a house and kept a house for herself.
MashaAllah.
So all of these things, we can overcome our conditions.
Definitely.
Those stories of courage, those are the things I look to, and I think if they can make it at that time, we can make it in our time.
Point on. Now finally, I mean, the last question, where can one purchase this book as we're running out of time?
So the book is available on Amazon for people who have access to Amazon, but we're also working with eZone here in the mall.
In the mall.
To import it to here. So I just had a meeting with the lady that runs eZone downstairs. And eZone I'll be sending a shipment to the Gambia, and then you'll be able
at the Madiba Mall here.
At the Madiba Mall here, you'll be able to get your copy.
So you can get your copy of Beyond Bilal, written by the knowledgeable Mustafa Briggs, and here at Madiba Mall at eZone. So move fast and get a copy of your book. Mustafa, on that note, I want to thank you for taking time. I mean, it's been very short, at a very short notice, and you're traveling tonight to be one of our guests at the TAF Hub. We haven't hosted, many people like yourself, but you've made it different, and we enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching the TAF Hub. Until we come your way on our next episode, subscribe, like, and share.